Welcome to another edition of Dr. Victor Moore's YA Wednesday interviews. Today, my guest is Nora Shalaway Carpenter, and Nora is a new author and an editor of a wonderful volume that's getting a lot of press and play. Shay Parton and others have reviewed it and talked about it on Facebook and other places, but it's Rural Voices. And today we're going to talk about both of those books and your future plans. So Nora, tell us a little bit about yourself as a new author, and who do we need to know about Nora, and then we can pick a book to talk about a little bit.
Sure. So both of my books came out in 2020. The first one, The Edge of Anything, like 2 days after the world shut down for the pandemic. So it was quite a year, I have to say. And but all of my writing is you can definitely tell that I come from a rural place. I think it's very connected to the environment. The setting is super important. And I'm really interested in socioeconomic differences and how that plays out in characters' lives. So that always is a theme in my books as well. So basically, those are some things that you can kind of look for in any of my works.
Well, that's okay. So you say they're connected to your past. So where are you from? Do you tell? I mean, so where did growing up happen?
Of course. So I grew up in Marshall County in West Virginia, in rural West Virginia. And the town is actually called Cameron, but most people have no idea where that is. But it's there's less than 1,000 people in the town and the surrounding area. So I went to school with the same kids from kindergarten through graduation, high school graduation. There was an elementary school and then a combined junior high and high school. So we had no filtering in, no filtering out. It was just, you went to school with it was really strange and interesting and good and bad and, all the different things. But yeah, I lived on a dirt road up on the mountains, and I grew up with 90 acres of woods. That was my, my parents were like, okay, it's time to go outside. And I mean, it was a little different, when I grew up, but I remember I would just go out and just like get lost in the woods. Like I was never really lost because my house was on top of a hill. So I always could kind of like orient myself and I'd be like, okay, I just have to like go that way eventually and I'll get to my house. But it was like a game I would play, So very different upbringing from a lot of my friends.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of people, that and that's a different kind of rural than kids living in the West in the desert, or kids living in, say, the dry farm area of Idaho, Washington, and Montana. There's a different kind of rural, and sometimes we want to polarize everything in America, right? We want to say there's urban and there's rural. Well, really, right. Rural can mean a lot of different things, and I think in your book you explore a lot of those things. So who are some of the people that you have writing in Rural Voices?
Yeah, so I got so lucky. I have such great contributors in Rural Voices. There's David Bowles, Joe Bruchek, Vita Bybee, Shay Harris, S.A. Cosby, who his career has just exploded. Yeah. He's just winning so many awards. It's awesome to see. Rob Costello, Randy Duburk, David McInnes-Gill, Nazir Grakrini Hobson, Estelle Lore, Shamile Said Mendez, Ashley Hope Perez, Tears of Price, and Monica Rowe.
I got everybody. Very good authors in that list, and some who I know pretty well. I know David. I know Ashley. Ashley was a guest here as a keynote.
Oh, cool! She's lovely.
And she's very, very engaging. But yeah, there's a lot of people, and Bruchek, that's a nice find as well to have that contribution. So it's like I say, it's a book that's getting a lot of play, and everybody I know that's been through it just says, wow, this is a really, really great collection. And I know in the academic side of young adult literature, there's always kind of been a call for more short stories. We wish that we had more. There's been some people along the way who championed that, but we probably can't point to as many kind of organic or theme-based collections of short stories as we might like, right? And I think the tradition of the short story collection is not as widespread as it was 100 years ago. You know,
Right.
everybody, Hemingway had a collection of short stories. In fact, probably started as a short story writer. Fitzgerald had short stories. I used to teach when I was a high school teacher, Winesburg, Ohio, right? And people think, and that kind of organic short story cycle. But we don't see those in young adult literature. And I think as more and more of us talk about young adult literature as a classification, not a genre, we need to pretty point to the fact that genres exist, right? Here's the verse novel or the novel in verse, and here's the collection of short stories, and here's the science fiction. So even the format changes, right? It's like somebody wants to say, well, graphic novels are one thing. And I had a guest in my class say, well, graphic novels is a format, but there might be mystery and detective and science fiction and nonfiction, right? And so I think you've found some interesting ground. So what does your editor say about edited volumes? What are you continuing to do that? Are you excited?
Yes, absolutely. I've been, I guess, bitten by the anthology bug, you would say. People either seem to really love anthologies or just not want to mess with them at all. And it's a lot of work, but I really enjoy it. In my previous life, before I was writing full time, I was the associate editor of a magazine called Wonderful West Virginia, the state magazine. And so that's where I kind of first got my, taste of editing. And yeah, I have another collection coming out with author Rocky Callan, and it's not coming out until 2023 because the pandemic has just really
slowed everything down.
A bunch of things up. Yeah, but it's called Absolutely Normal, and it's the same format in that we have all different genres of short stories in there, including some graphic shorts. And it's all about just like rural voices, like rural is the theme of Rural Voices. Absolutely Normal, the theme is normalizing mental health conditions and living with those. And so the stories aren't about characters. It's not about like the actual mental health condition. It's just all of the protagonists in the stories just happen to live with some mental health condition. And so you can see how that impacts their life, but they're still like full of hope. They're full of joy. I mean, there are trials and tribulations, of course, but I think especially now with the pandemic where mental health has really soared as a priority now because people that maybe didn't think about it before are suddenly being impacted. I think it's a really important way to reach all people, but especially teens. Like the short story format is so great for teens that maybe don't have a lot of time. Like they are so consumed with like their academic work at school, but a short story is so manageable, right? It's 20 pages, 25 pages, and you can just read it and be done.
Yeah. And you can do it in class if you're in school districts that don't have a lot of money or you don't take things home. There's a lot of ways in which teaching a whole short story instead of a part could be really intriguing. So are you talking about the authors you have lined up, or is that still secret?
I can tell you. I can tell you who I have lined up. I'm super, super excited about this book too. So let's see, we have Francisco X. Stork, Isabel Quintero, Jonathan Caston is a new emerging author because I love to highlight emerging authors as well. Anna Drury is a new emerging author. Nikki Grimes is in the book.
Nikki's great.
Val Hallett is a emerging author. Alicia Dow, she writes science fiction. Patrick Dow, no relation, but they have very similar last names. Sonia Patel, she's awesome. Marcella Pixley, she was shortlisted for the National Book Award this year. Rocky Callan is my co-editor. Mercedes Acosta, she is a graphic novelist. Her debut is coming out, I think, next year. Ebony Stewart is a phenomenal oh my gosh, the poet, where she speaks up and what's it called? Slam poetry.
Yes.
Yeah. And so she's won like the women's world slam poetry contest, and her work is amazing. James Bird is in it. He actually writes mostly middle grade, but he did a YA short piece for our collection. And Karen Bowell is the other contributor. And so yeah, I'm just super, super grateful and excited. And it was easier to get people to sign on to this one once I already had one, like people.
You should. It sounds like you've got a lot of things going on. It's really exciting to think about that. So that's great. Do you do introductions to the book? You have somebody write a foreword? What did you do for the first one, and what are you planning for the next one?
So for Rural Voices, I wrote a foreword, and it's about 4 pages long, just about how the book came to be, why I felt it was necessary, why at that moment. For Absolutely Normal, Rocky and I are going to write a foreword, but we are also talking about having like a mental health professional maybe also write like a little introduction, just about how important literature can be, because there is like this thing called bibliotherapy, and not that you're actually recommending
books. You have people on the hook for that, or are you still shopping around thinking?
No, we're still shopping around. So if you have recommendations, I'm all ears.
I have a couple of people that I think it would be worth approaching Chris Crutcher, for example.
Okay.
To do that, and I can connect with him. And
then
I worked with a woman when Michelle Falter and I did an edited collection and talking about grief.
Yes.
And we had her write an introduction for one of our books. And let me grab it and see if I can. But she was a mental health therapist who did a lot of work after 9/11 in New York City with.
Oh, wow.
Those. And so she's been around, and the name is escaping me, so I'll look it up to make sure that I get it. But I think you've got a topic that, Donna A. Gaffney, and I can send you Donna's information as well.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
But I think Chris would be interested, if not the introduction. I think he'd be very interested in blurbing it, because most people know his, as not only as a writer, but for more than 30 years, he was a child therapist, worked with children and trauma and, those kinds of things. So it's interesting. But those are 2 people that I think would be interesting. I think A.S. King would be another person that you would want to blurb it if you could get her. But, sometimes these people feel overwhelmed, right, with that. But
so she actually was signed on as a contributor, and because she teaches at Vermont College of Fine Arts, where I went to school. But then she backed out, because when she read the proposal again, the stories are not based, but they have to, the protagonists are suffering from a lived experience the same as the author.
Okay.
And so she didn't identify in that way as, as suffering from some kind of mental health disorder. So she was like, I don't think I can do this. So that was very sad, but I am definitely going to be like, will you blurb, please?
Yeah. I think she's a really great person to blurb, and she's a wonderful person. It's as many of these people are, but they're often busy. You can't do that. But I'd be, in fact, Chris Crutcher is visiting my class this afternoon. So
there you go. You can plug me.
I'll plug for you a little bit, Nora.
There you go.
I think, and he's also been really great to be a friend to people that are starting in the field.
Oh.
So I think that he would be more than interested. And he grew up in a little tiny Idaho town, where they played 7-man football, and that, not big. So so his I'm sure he'd love to get a copy of Rural Voices too. He probably will see himself in some of those stories as well. So tell us a little bit about, we'll shift gears from your anthology work and your editing work, which I think is fabulous. And I'm going to do this slowly so I do it right. Your debut book is The Edge of Anything.
That
right?
is great. Yes, very good.
Tell us about that, because my heart just goes out to you and so many people who, oh, we have this book, it's coming out in the spring of
2020.
2020. What could be better than the spring of 2020? Well,
Right.
in retrospect, almost everything.
Right.
The zombie
Right.
apocalypse might be better, right? At
Oh,
least didn't know what we had, right?
I know. I have to say, there's one thing about the 2020 debuts is that we have like this shared trauma that has like brought us close, like because yeah, but anyway, so yeah, the book is called The Edge of Anything, and it is set in the mountains of North Carolina, which is where I live now. So Asheville is the area, but it's really set more kind of in the outskirts of Asheville. And it tells the story of two very different young women. Sage, who is a high school volleyball star, like she's so good. She's, headed for Division I for a scholarship. And Len is, she's a junior, and she is the opposite. She's really not popular. She's a loner. She's a photographer, and you learn pretty quickly that something's not quite, like she's had something happen that has really impacted her. And so they're kind of thrown together, and they develop this friendship, kind of to both of their surprise. And each of them ends up empowering the other one, so that they both have to save themselves. They both are keeping these secrets that could really, that are basically life and death secrets. It ends up being, and they both have to, they both basically help each other. And so it's a real ode to friendship, a real, I've always been fascinated by deep platonic friendship, and I don't think that it gets enough play in literature. There's a lot of focus on the romantic element. And I mean, I have some people say that they they want Sage and Len to get together, and that's fine. Like, if that's what they see in their mind, that's fine. But like, how I wrote the book, it's more just a focus on, these girls, even though they're very different, they're both from very different classes too, right? Because I mentioned that I'm really interested in that. And so one of them is, doesn't have to worry about money at all. One of them really is like on the borderline of poverty. And how that impacts their lives and the decisions that they have to make, and even their value system, right? So I'm hoping, I just hope that I hope that one of the things that readers take away from my books is just kind of some deep thinking on thoughts that maybe they're like, I never really thought about that. I wouldn't necessarily have thought, oh, someone's economic situation might impact their value system and why they would make one choice over the other, or something like that, And then there's also a theme of mental health in the book. And so I'm very big, as we talked about Absolutely Normal, I'm very big on normalizing mental health. And so the interplay between the two young women, of that, like how it comes up and how it's handled, and how it's handled by other characters in the book and parents in the book, that kind of thing is really important. And yeah, that's
it sounds, I agree with you. I think the relationship issue with adolescents, who likes me and who should I like, is really big and plays out in novel after novel after novel, right?
Absolutely.
But we don't have as many stories where it's about the friendship without the need to push or pull it either way. And sometimes even that friendship between members of the opposite sex as well, who are just friends, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that I remember teaching Aristotle and Dante the first time, which is a wonderful book. I love it. But one of my students said, a male student, he said, I love the book, but I so wanted them just to be friends, because it reminded me, he said, it reminded me of friendship I had that we don't talk about, and sometimes are more difficult to sustain, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's a point well taken. And I think that I'm thinking a little bit of Jeff Zetter's books too. I think that, you know,
I love him so much.
I think the Serpent King has that friendship that is, you know, between some characters that really is on the, and the Goodbye Days is about the loss of friendship, right?
Right.
And so I think there's some, and the Midnight Matinee, right? That was too. But so so I think you've found something that I would love for people to read more of and make those comparisons, because I wonder how many times I'm thinking about the books I've taught and said, let's look at the beautiful friendship in this book, right? But that's
Right.
not necessarily what we do. I think historically we come close with the outsiders, you know, but, you know, and it's also that, should it always have to involve death, where we are aware that the friend is gone, right? Is leaving. And I think maybe there's something to be said just for friendship, right? Just for friendship. And I think that you've maybe landed on something. You should do a third anthology where we have, you know, friendship rules, right?
Oh, there we go. All right, I'm going to tell my editor, Dr. Pickmore said I actually have a third anthology underway, but I can't talk about it.
Oh, you can't talk about it. Well, maybe you can have a fourth, right?
Yes.
It's the kind of thing that Don Gallo would be very pleased with you. He's one of the old founders of Allen. We ought to make sure that he gets a copy of your edited anthologies, because he was pioneering some of those, and still some of the royalties from his books he donates to the Allen Foundation, because he, you know, he's a professor, retired, and that's one of the ways he gives back. But he was one of the early ones to do that, you know, kind of put an anthology or invite some authors to do one. So you're in a good tradition, but I say, like you say, it's a really small, you know, we don't have a lot of them.
Right, absolutely.
So you say you have, you know, other things in the works. You have a second novel in the works, and you know when that's coming out.
I do have a second novel that's also coming out in 2023. I don't know why all my books have to publish in the same year. It's very frustrating, but stupid COVID. Yeah, so it's called Fault Lines, and it is set in rural West Virginia, and kind of like a fictionalized version of kind of a cross between where I grew up and where my husband grew up. He grew up in a different part of West Virginia than me, but it focuses heavily on environmental ethics and again, socioeconomic stuff. Basically, there's a character who just like happened in my town, the pipeline came in and it gave a lot of people jobs, but it also brought in other people, and then some people benefited from it. A lot of people didn't. So there's kind of like there's this huge rift already. And so one of my main characters, she has a real vendetta against the pipeline because it has taken something away from her that's really important. And so she's like out kind of to get revenge or to like make them pay somehow. And then the other main character is new to town, and his mom, she is a veteran, and she just got her first good job to pull them up out of poverty for the first time, and it's with the pipeline, right? So they have these two characters coming from very different worldviews, and they're
with probably similar issues in some ways, right?
Yes, it is interesting, but I'm really loving working on it, and I like stories that do that put kind of two characters together where there's not like an easy answer, right? Because if there was an easy answer to this stuff, we would have fixed it, we would think, right? So
well, or sometimes we have answers, but we don't have the will to implement the answer.
Well, exactly. And a lot of times there's like policy involved, right? Where we have to like make certain policy changes, and how does that happen?
So I have to ask about the female character. Does she have a name yet?
She does. Her name is Viv.
Viv. So is she reading Edward Abbey and the Monkey Wrench Gang and getting wild, you know?
She's not doing that. But maybe, I mean, maybe I can, I don't know.
Oh, on her shelf is, you know, a ragged copy from the Monkey right? You know,
yeah, there you go. I'll make myself a little note. It'll be like,
I thought about that and I thought, oh, there'd be so many ways that
right.
a precocious kid could, you know, could do some of that stuff. It sounds like you've got some fascinating things going on. Now, one of the questions I like to ask is, what's your writing process? What does your day look like? How do you do it? Do you do it by word count, by time on task? What do you do?
Yeah, no, I hate word count. It stresses me out. So I don't ever do that. I do it on time. So I get my kids ready to school, get them to school. And then while they're at school, I write. And to keep me on track, because otherwise I work at home a lot. I mean, before the pandemic, I often would work at a coffee shop, but now I'm basically working always from home. And so I set my timer for an hour so that I'm like, okay, you know, I'm butt in the chair writing for an hour. Then when the timer goes off, and I'm often like in the middle of it, so I'll just put it back on. But if not, if I need a little break, I'll get up and stretch, I'll do whatever I need to do. And then I come back and I keep writing. And drafting for me is definitely the hardest part, because especially after you go from having a book published and it's in its final state and it's gone through a lot of revisions, and so it's bright and shiny, right? And you're like, oh, I've been working with this book for so long and it's so great and la la la. And then you're like starting over from scratch, and you're still telling yourself the story, you're still learning about the characters. And I know rationally that I'm going to go back and I'm going to make it nice and shiny, right? But still, it's a little bit difficult for me to just kind of like, oh, get it down on the paper. So I definitely have like reminders to myself, like just write, don't worry, like turn off that editing brain.
Oh yeah, so you want to edit as you go rather than get a chapter out or get a plot line down.
Right. And I've really come a long way. Like when I was a student, like with writing, like with even like academic papers and stuff, I edited while I went, right? I kind of like would get all the information and like hold it in my brain. And I just wanted to like get it out and do it. And so like, you know, when people had to make us do like drafts and things like that, I was like, oh, this is terrible.
I drafted it as I went. Yeah. I knew a woman who, we're old, when we were in college, she could do a final draft on the typewriter.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And of an analytical 3 or 4 page. And the rest of us would look at her and go, clearly you're smarter than the rest of us. How does that happen? Right? You know, it's like, I was so, in the days of typewriter, I would write drafts of things skipping every other line because I knew that I was going to have to edit in between the lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And before I had ever make an attempt to put it on a typewriter, you know, the people say, well, what's the greatest invention of my life was spell check and a word processor, right? So,
well, and I think it's so important too to like find your own process, right? Because it's so different for everyone. Like I said, I hate word count. I have friends that like, they live and die by that. They're like, I'm going to write, 2,000 words today or 5,000 words today. And which is just that like makes me want to vomit to even think about it. Like I like to go back and I'll be like, oh, look, I wrote 1,500 words in my sitting. Like I feel great. But or even if I finish a section and I'm not even like looking at the word count, it's like I've moved on in the story. So I know I'm on pace. It's too much pressure for me to try and do the word count thing.
I think it's good for people to hear that, because I think there's, ways in which there's all kinds of ways to approach it. But I think high school students or middle school students who are thinking about themselves as writers, need to start cataloging the ways in which are productive for them. And often we probably need to be more open as teachers about a variety of ways in which that can happen. And sometimes we need to be better instructors. I've been fortunate enough now that I have former students who are published writers, and some of them say, well, that activity you did in class helped me be a writer. And one say, oh no, I didn't pay any attention to that. Right? It was, and it's, but you feel like, oh, they're each different in how they produce. what's going on. So have you always been a writer? Do you have that unpublished novel in the bottom drawer that you can't throw away because it's still sitting there that you started in the 7th grade? And
I don't have a novel I started in the 7th grade. I wrote short stories for as long as I can remember. That felt manageable to me. I always wanted to be a novelist, but even when I was a teenager, I was like, I don't even know how I would go about this. And I honestly, looking back, I know some teenagers do that, but I didn't feel like I had like the life experience to like give a book what it needed, And so I honestly, I think I was a little bit too afraid. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to go the academic route. I love reading literature. I'll be an academic, and then I'll like write books in my spare time, like such like nonsense. And and so I kind of started on that route. And then I was really jealous of my friends that were in the MFA program. I was like always wanting to do their assignments. And I was like, oh, I think I'm in the wrong program. So once I figured that out, I switched and I went back to get my, so actually before I switched, I did write a book. I wrote a novel and I proved to myself that I could do it. And so I was like, okay, now I want to learn how to do it really well.
Yeah.
And so that's when I went back and got my MFA. And that's also when I really learned how to revise. I mean, because I think revision for me, I always thought, and it was kind of taught to me that it's like what copy editing is, right? Like where you're fixing grammar, you're fixing, like you're making it nice. And that's not what revision is in creative writing. Revision is really like visioning, and sometimes completely reshaping the piece. And so once I learned that books are so much better if you kind of are willing to like leave like your original attempt go and let the story open up as it will, then that's where like the magic happens. And so I used to hate revision, and now I love revision, and I'm like, oh, drafting is so horrible. I just want it to be done so I can revise it, So I definitely had a switch.
Yeah, and I've heard, from authors that would start with telling the story of 2 characters, and then one character just kind of disappears or becomes a side mention. And one of the first authors I got to know and talk about the writing process was Kimberly Willis Holt, and she still writes longhand, writes everything longhand, and but she says she will often stop and rewrite a scene from the point of view of everybody in the scene.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because she says, well, maybe that character is going to see it in a different way, right? And she says, and so that's a lot of rewriting and re-envisioning, right? And,
absolutely.
And she said, sometimes nothing survives, or sometimes a line survives that you give to somebody else or helps you see it. She says she's even done it from the point of view of pets.
Cool.
So that all of a sudden she says, oh, just being on the ground and looking up at it maybe makes me see what's going on with the characters differently. And I thought the difficulty and, doing that, but she has some wonderful books, Dear Hank Williams and Zachary Beaver and My Louisiana Sky. She's done okay with that method, but she's still she almost shyly says, yeah, I still write by longhand, right? First.
Erin Antrada Kelly writes by longhand, her first draft. So there are definitely people that do that.
Yeah, there's people that still do it, but I think people find a process that's really important for them and that they find productive, right? And we're not, I'm sure many of them have evolved to do things in other ways, to do it. But I think that's a fascinating thing that you want to compel to edit and revision as you go, right?
Right.
But you know that revisioning or that the editing or the revising is going to make you look through the whole book with new lens, right? As you
absolutely go. I mean, it's like impossible to really revise a book until you get to the end, until you know, like even if you think you know what's going to happen, even if you have like an outline, when you actually write that book, you're like, whoa, look at all this other stuff that happened that I like unconsciously put in there, and so that's like the fun where you can go back and make those connections and highlight metaphors.
It's a good challenge. I often, people say, well, why don't you write something? I think, have you ever read The World According to Garp. You know, I think I'm the reader, not the writer, right? You know, in that I'm the wife, not the, you know, not the famous novelist. You know, I think, and I've, you know, written a few things, some essay kinds of things, and a few poems, but I just am compelled to keep reading, right? And so maybe one day I'll feel like I've read enough, but I admire the hearing the process as well. It's like I became an English teacher so I could read. You know, I didn't want to write anything.
Yeah.
What? We're gonna have to teach your students to write. I said, really? Is that really something that has to happen? You know, and yes, it has to happen, right? So it's a good thing that we have people like you that are willing to talk about the process and share it. And I like I say, I hope we can do everything we can to help you and others reboot, you know, what came out in 2020,
Thank
right?
you. Thank you. Yes, that was, oh man.
Well, and I'm sure publishers are just as frustrated as others. And so, well, Nora, it's been great to talk with you. We'll keep in touch. We'll we'll do some more. So thanks for being one of my interview subjects on Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.